It's no secret to anyone, everyone knows that right now Hendrick needs to play. You may not follow soccer closely, but you've likely heard about it and know Hendrick is the future of the Brazilian national team. And the problem is that when at Real Madrid he can't get enough playing time, the national team's future goal scoring, looking ahead to the 2030 World Cup, is at risk. So the situation is clear, either he plays or he needs to leave Real Madrid. But there's an angle to this story that no one is talking about yet, and I needed to bring it to you. Leaving is one thing, but where and under what conditions does Hendrick need to leave Real? In the middle of last season, it was clear he wasn't going to get enough minutes, so he went on loan to Pullion, had an immediate impact, is going to the World Cup largely thanks to those last 6 months of the season, and now he's back. Other scenarios are emerging now. Join me as we explore this idea. This situation stood out in the transfer window and highlights why Endrick needs to leave. Varane announced this Monday the signing of striker Gonzalo Garcia, who left Real Madrid, and the English club paid about 40 million euros. For those who don't remember, Gonzalo Garcia was the starter for Real Madrid in the Club World Cup, since for most of the competition they didn't use Mbappe, as they were resting him during this offseason. And in several moments when Hendrick could have been used, it was this guy Gonzalo who came in. In fact, what a coincidence, right? His coach at Varane now is going to be Arbeloa, the same Arbeloa who coached Real Madrid last season. But what makes me suspicious in the middle of this whole story is this other signing here. According to the Spanish newspaper Marca, the club secured Spi's arrival on a second attempt. The club here is Real Madrid in this case. Real Madrid had been following the player since 2024 when he was starting to get playing time in Levante's main team. Now, they paid the release clause of 25 million euros. Spi will replace Gonzalo Garcia. That's our current situation, isn't it? Hendrick is joining a team with a very strong squad. Probably the biggest team in world football, that's always competing for the biggest titles and has Mbappe as its starting striker, the top scorer in World Cup history, and also the top scorer of the last World Cup. In this context, it's already clear that the backup striker for Real won't get much playing time. It's one thing for a guy to come on with 15 minutes left in the game, it's another to play in a cup match. But at Hendrick's age, he needs more than that. And then, to make things worse, there was a guy who played more than Hendrick, whose name is Gonzalo Garcia. And then they sell Gonzalo, hire another cheaper Spanish player who will probably get even more playing time than the Brazilian. When I mention playing time, that's what really gets my attention. This is an article from Portal Tela, and it includes comments and a study with Eduardo Diaz, who is the CEO of Futre, a company specialized in soccer data. And he points out that playing time is the best predictor of a player's future value. In other words, the more a player plays, the more he's worth. He states that playing is fundamental for the development and evolution of athletes. Data shows that the market value of players grows until they are 23 or 24 years old. And here I'm not just talking about being financially worthwhile for Real Madrid, but if the market value increases when the player plays more, up to, at most, 23 or 24 years old on average. At the very least, it means that his performance also keeps improving, and wealthy clubs project that this player will become a major standout. Hendrick is 20 years old today. By the 2030 World Cup, he'll be exactly 24, the age the article references for the Brazilian national team. Also, note the importance of playing time. Playing time becomes a determining factor in negotiations. Palmeiras, for example, sold the defender Vitor Reis, who is 19 years old, for 37 million euros to Manchester City, after he had accumulated about 1,500 minutes on the field. For comparison, Hendrick was signed by Real Madrid for around 47 million euros after playing 4,600 minutes for Palmeiras. The problem is that since he arrived at Real Madrid, he has made 40 appearances and played 946 minutes. That's less than what Vitor Reis had at Palmeiras when he left. The correlation here is direct. A player who plays more is worth more because he performs more, and naturally, he develops his career further, gaining access to clubs and starting positions he didn't have before, and with that, he gets more opportunities to become a key player. Exactly what Brazil needs in the next World Cup. Playing time is a key point when analyzing a player. It's no use just looking at the number of goals, assists, or key passes. You need to look at that by normalizing for players' playing time. This is important in the real world, and it's also important in our fantasy game. And those who understand this get ahead. Want to learn more? Click the link in the description or pinned comment. After joining Real Madrid and not playing as much as expected, despite competing with Mbappe for a spot, some Brazilian clubs began inquiring about the striker. Because obviously a player who has already performed well here and is at a higher level, bringing him in even on loan would make a lot of sense to strengthen the squad and have a first-rate starter. Speaking from the club side, it makes perfect sense. The problem is that this story doesn't really make sense from Hendrick's perspective. The Brazilian championship lacks the competitive level Hendrick wants for his career. If he wants to develop as a top-tier player in world football, he needs to be playing top-tier matches in world football. It's a rivalry match against Barcelona, it's a derby, sometimes even against another team. If he leaves Real Madrid, it's Champions League matches and winning big titles that help him not only get a lot of playing time, but to have a lot of playing time in a competitive context. And that's what will make him more ready for a World Cup. We need to be clear that what got Hendrick to this point in his career is not what's going to take him to the next step. Everything he did in the past at Palmeiras is not what's going to get him to the top tier of world football the way he imagined. Getting to Real Madrid is one thing, playing there is another. Plus, now there's a stigma for players who leave and later return to play in Brazil. First of all, the clubs abroad see a player who didn't have enough patience to develop. Clubs don't want to spend a lot only to sell him soon after, likely without profit. Plus, he'll be older than when he first came to Europe. The most common path is for players to leave, come back, and when there's a new offer, it's usually for an alternative market. Saudi market, French market, Ukrainian market, Russian market, like in the case of Zenit, but it's definitely not at the same level anymore. Besides, it's not uncommon for a player to come back, rediscover himself, find himself again in Brazilian football, in a much more comfortable environment, and end up staying, being signed permanently, like Gabigol, for example. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. I believe if Gabigol had stayed abroad, he wouldn't have become nearly as big as he did by returning to Brazil. The same goes, for example, for Pedro and probably for Gerson as well. But that path doesn't seem to match what Hendrick is looking for in his career. So we have another possibility. This is where my preferred solution for Hendrick's career begins. Since we see that he won't get playing time at Real Madrid and that returning to Brazilian football would be a step back in his career, I believe that instead of jumping straight from a Brazilian club to a top European team, maybe he would need to go through a stepping stone club, just like he did at Lyon last season, but with more consistency so he can really blossom as the player he is. It feels like even though he's at a top club, Hendrick hasn't reached the elite level yet. Another loan move could be interesting. Maybe now at the start of the season so he could have a full season at another club and probably with Real Madrid setting a minimum playing time clause in the loan contract. Otherwise, there would be a penalty or the player would be sent back or something similar. Usually, great players' careers involve some intermediate clubs anyway. Players rarely move directly from peripheral leagues like Brazil's to top European clubs. That's why stepping stone clubs exist. PSV, Ajax, Benfica, Sporting, Porto, or possibly going back to Lyon, or another French team, or maybe even a German team. Antony has an interesting career in that sense, right? He leaves São Paulo for Ajax, manages to establish himself, goes to England, has some problems at Manchester United and takes a step back. Still very young, okay? Antony is at a great age for the next World Cup. At Betis, he's re-establishing himself as a top Brazilian in European football. Only those unwilling to see it miss it. But for me, there's a problem with the loan system. And Antony almost went through that. When you're considered a loan player, it's natural that you're already undervalued. You're no longer put on the same level as before. And the problem with that many times is that you're going to move from one club to another, you'll have to adapt to a new league, a new coach's style, a new country, why not? Even a new home. And when you're at your peak, already at the end of the season, you leave to start all over again somewhere else, whether it's at Real Madrid or another club. That's why there's another solution that almost no one is talking about, and it's my favorite. Real Madrid has a very similar case that's working really well in Europe, which is the case of Nico Paes. Nico Paes is Argentine, but he was developed in Real's youth academy, and he was sold to Como in Italy, which this season qualified for the next edition of the Champions League. The magic is in the details. When he was sold to Como, Real Madrid included a buyback clause in his contract for only 6 million euros. Let's be honest, that's basically free for a club like Real Madrid, which could see a youth player develop and then buy him back for a very cheap 6 million euros. If things go wrong, they've already made money from the first sale, and it turns out the deal worked. Nico Paes was one of the big standouts of last season's Italian league, and this happened. According to the Spanish press, Real Madrid will receive around 60 million euros for the full rights to the Argentine player. What happened? They bought Nico Paes back for 6, sold him back to Como for 60. In this scenario, I see it as a win-win-win. Hendrick could go to another team as a permanent signing, but still have a connection and an opportunity to return to the elite of European football. If he performs well, Real Madrid would have two options. Either they would want to pay to have Hendrick strengthen their squad, or they would want to make money like they did with Nico Paez. And Hendrick would be on a team where he could perform really well. A similar case happened with Casemiro in the past too. He was signed by Real Madrid coming from Sao Paulo and was loaned to Porto. And then Real Madrid announced this Friday that they paid, this is an article from 2015, right, that they paid 7.5 million euros to Porto to get the midfielder Casemiro back. This case here was more of a loan. Porto basically had an option to buy by paying 15 million euros at the end of the contract. So what did Real Madrid want to do? No, I cancel your option to buy by paying now for a player I already have just to cancel this loan and bring him back to my team, and that's why it's my preferred option. He would go to another club with a better status without being devalued by a loan situation and already with a clause that would allow him to return to the top of Europe. He'd also get more playing time and could stand out on other teams and leagues. Obviously strengthen our Brazilian national team, but tell me down below, if you had to choose a mid-level European club, where do you think Hendrick should go and why? I'm really keen on the French league and the Bundesliga, and in the Bundesliga, Borussia Dortmund would be the perfect fit for me. Now you just have to click on any of these 4 videos appearing on the screen to keep binge watching the content here on Futebol Maximo. I'll see you there.